A lot of people think that mimesis, or some people pronounce it mimesis, is to do with copying in some kind of relatively exact way, something that somebody else has done. They're thinking about it purely in representational terms. I honestly don't think that as a concept, it would have had a 2,500 or more year history if it was as boring as that. A person's body is suffused with a particular medium, whether that's words or, I don't know, AI things or movement or visual art, contexts, music, whatever, that it actually, it's interesting. I haven't thought about it this way before. Rather than thinking about the performer's body as one that morphs into its materials, mimesis, it seems to me, describes what happens when the materials pass through your body and they change it. Inevitably and inexorably, they change it. So when an actor says a line from a play, the resonances of those words change them forever. And the change that's going on is in a way represencing through what the person then is doing as this thing is happening to them. It's not representing anything. It is represencing that energy that passes through one. I think audiences get really interested in seeing that change happen in front of them. That doesn't mean it has to be live in person, but it has to be live. A film can be live, it just isn't in person. But as an audience member, you are in person. There is a way, I think, also that mimesis is something that happens to an audience member as the medium of whatever performer is performing passes through them. And you can stop that happening as an audience member. I think sometimes you have to learn how to stop it happening because you might not want to allow that many changes from a particular performance. And you can encourage it. Audiences learn how to be an audience. They don't just know how to do it. I think it's a very profound and deep somatic change. Could be a very small change, but it's a real change. The moment anybody touches you, the fingerprints of that touch will stay with you forever. You may not be conscious of them. They're the ghosts of all those interactions, the vibrations, the resonances. So that's what I think mimesis is. Performativity it's more thinking about the performer and how does the performer learn how to morph with the materials that they've got. With mimesis, a medium passes through the person. Performativity is something that is what happens when a performer has learned how to carry the energy from that change to an audience. It's a skill and it's learned. They're totally related, but maybe it's taking a different perspective on what's happening. Mimesis is a way of describing or accounting for or verbalizing, probably articulating what happens during moments of performativity. It's got a very long history in the aesthetics, and the word aesthetics means feelings, in the way that people think about their somatic responses and affect and feeling for thousands of years in many different cultures. It's obviously not called that in cultures such as Sanskrit-based cultures or the cultures that come out of East Asia or the cultures that come out of early African languages. It's not called mimesis, but I'm sure you'd find something similar. It would never be exactly the same. You just have to look at like early drama and the connections with shamanism and the way in which the shaman becomes the material that they're dealing with. Not forever. When they do it forever, they tend to be ostracized and kicked out of the society and die. But they learn. Shaman trains, and it often has a guide to help them into that situation and come out of it again. That process of going into it and coming out of it, maybe that's the difference between mimesis and performativity. The mimesis is the actual of the change happening, and performativity is the ability to carry that energy of change to other people. I'm not sure. I'd have to think more about that. Sameness can be a replication. But replication is actually impossible. One of the reasons why I quite enjoy the field of rhetoric is that rhetoric has thousands and thousands of different ways of repeating something in a slightly different way. I love the way that it alerts you to the multiplicity of ways in which things can repeat. Copying in the public understanding, it really has connotations, especially in the kind of rational world of capitalism, which depends on replication for market stability. I think copying for a lot of people has that sense of replication rather than repetition and the multiple variants that you can have. You and the material, you disappear. You doesn't exist anymore. And it morphs into the ecology of the material, and the material doesn't exist anymore. You're just in an ecology. And when you precipitate out of it, or when you gather yourself out of it, you are necessarily, you come back, or you are suddenly in a way that you never were before, because you've been part of that changing ecology. And you can't deny that. You can't get rid of it. So you've got to be really careful about the words that you use, because we're so used to saying, oh, you go into this ecology. Well, you doesn't go into the ecology. There is no you. I've worked with people who are contact improvisers or who are radical contemporary dancers. And we always seem to meet over the idea of energy. The Taoist movement systems on the whole are more focused on energy than they are on anything else. So you're not trying to create an effect. You're trying to sense where the energy is going and coming, where the flow is, where the dance is of that energy. And normally in a Taoist movement practice, you begin with a physical touch. You're not really focused on touch. You're focused on trying to sense the energy flow, and that might involve touch. But touch isn't your primary thing. Your primary thing is your awareness and attentiveness to the energy flow. From my own experience, when you goes away, in a funny way, there isn't any identifiable energy. You're just part of, maybe that's what I mean by ecology, an energy field or something like that. When I talk about energy, I'm talking about a very specific somatic feeling, that there are different kinds. There's the one that I'm feeling right now, which is along the surface of my skin. And it's bringing the hairs up on my arm. And there's energies that go really deep into the bone. There's energies that are carried by the breath as it moves around the body. So there's different kinds of energy. It's something that I actually feel. I think for having worked for quite a long time now with other people on this, there's very often a kind of wow moment when they suddenly identify a surge of energy that they have learned how to prompt. In Taoism, everything comes in fives, right? The way in which you nurture and harvest and store and express and direct. In a Taoist system, pure Taoist system, they're related to the five elements. To nurture, i.e. grow, to harvest, to store, because you don't want to spend all your energy immediately and have nothing in reserve. To express, which I think is where a lot of the actual performative and performance elements come in, and direct, which is even more, because that involves an audience. Sometimes harness and nurture are switched around so that you harness energy first, and then you nurture it, and then you store it. For example, we nurture energy through the way that you live your life. Do you get enough sleep? Do you eat well? Do you get sunlight when you need the sunlight? Are you looking after this thing that is where the energy is gathered? You don't just go and harvest up the energy and stick it in a jar in the storage. In between storing it somewhere, you also nurture it in your own way. And then when you need to, sometimes people do it just when they want to. If you're in a privileged situation, you can do that kind of thing. You can just express and direct energy when you want to. But most of us, we do that when we need to, because it depletes you. And you can get tired and run down. And you have to be careful about how you are expressing the energy. If you get really good at harvesting and storing and nurturing and storing energy, it gives you an awful lot of energy to express and direct. And you can get trapped into this cycle where you've got all this energy and you really need to express it and direct it. And then you get depleted. But then you know how to do this, expressing and directing energy just because you want to, or somebody else wants you to. The most identifiable thing that I think of when I talk about energy in terms of performance and performativity is that the change that happens or that has happened to your body when you come back from whatever it was you were doing with the materials that you are then going to convey to others in a performance, that change is an energy. So when I sense something in myself that is different or distinct from what I thought myself was before, and I want to carry that out to other people, because you can't know things, they're not known. So the only way that you can convey any kind of sense of knowing a thing is by conveying the energy that has resulted from the change that has happened to you when you morphed with that thing. This is just one way of thinking about something that could be articulated and documented and be part of documenting in so many other ways. It's just a way that I've grown into because of the various different things that have happened to me in my lifetime and the things that resonate with me. Somebody once asked me, where did the word socio-situated come from? I don't know. It just came one day when I was writing an article. It just seemed to be the appropriate word. I didn't have a source for it. Very few other people use it, but I find it really useful. It helps me to talk about things that normally get erased and obscured from discourse. Every single person that I've ever met has something that doesn't fit that subject-object thing. It doesn't fit in, it's not fitting. To value those kinds of not fitting in things and to nurture them and allow them to present is a super important thing for most of us to do. And most of us do it, but we tend to do it at crisis point, births, deaths, amputations. Performers train or labor or learn or are guided to do that kind of thing within the medium that they are learning with. So they do it on a much more regular basis. We all have genealogies that are part of the current zeitgeist, and they cross and they crisscross with each other. I've never really belonged to a school. I guess I'm absolutely a child of my time, but my time has many locations. It takes an enormous amount of work and commitment to set up the program. It wasn't just done by me, it was done by groups of people. The main reason I wanted to do that was that I grew up in a philosophical and a cultural studies environment that said that there couldn't be anything except for discourse. Because of the kind of classical work that I've done and the decolonial work I've done in other cultures all around the world, you know that's not the only way that you can think. It is super important to do what cultural studies does and look at power and who has it, who doesn't have it, how do you access it, how do you stop it being manipulated, how do you manipulate it for good things or bad things, or what do you want to do with it? But I also think that there is an enormous range of our lives which lies out with that. What if we started with these things that we really value in our lives, and then the discourse surrounds that in fragmentary and not very complete ways? What would happen if you reversed that entire picture so that what is out with is actually the discourse? That central commitment to performance studies at Davis came from a sense that cultural studies was only talking about one area of our lives. There was another area of everybody's life, every single person's life, that performers did really well. If I started thinking about performers from a practice point of view, I might begin to understand some of the things that happen to people in their everyday lives and how they can be in a better position to nurture, harvest, store, express, direct energy. Without the performers that I've worked with and the people who make work and who make what we sometimes call artwork, I couldn't think in this way. I'm interested in the somatic experience of writing, and eventually I think I'll probably get into the performance of it. The reader makes writing performative, as well as the writer encourages the reader, or can encourage, or may encourage the reader to make writing performative. A performative writing requires so much of the reader that it has to be short. Performative writing is always going to take the reader a lot longer to read. The university as an institution has to change its idea of a normal essay. If we're going to have a really serious attention to performative writing as a critical tool, which I think is really important because it's one of the few ways that we can carry the energy of the performances that we want to talk about, we're going to have to change our expectations. A lot of the work that Practices Research has done has been done at the same time that we have acquired digital means to write and read. You get hypertext critical pieces. I remember a really lovely piece written on Nicole Brossard's, one of her novels, done in the early 90s. That was a really beautiful piece of criticism. It was done as a hypertext. You have video essay. There are so many different ways in which one could use the digital to make writing more performative. There you are really talking about the graphic and the typographic and the visual presentation of that. But the word in writing is something open to development and change. The word error comes from to err, to wander. So when you make an error, you're not making a mistake, you're just wandering off a different path, which might be quite interesting. What I tend to do when I get to an improvised piece is I put it typographically in a different space. I'll put it in a different font, or I'll put a little box around it, or I'll indicate to the reader that what follows should not be thought of as correct academic writing. I'll tell them that it's going to be performative. They have to change the way that they're going to interact with this thing. These mistakes that you make are not really mistakes most of the time. Most famously, James Joyce had their books typographically set because they wrote in such a strange way. The typographers didn't know the words that they were setting. If they thought that the author had made a mistake, they corrected it. He gets his proofs back for Ulysses, and there are all these words that have been changed by the typographer. And he systematically goes through, according to the edited evidence that we have, he accepted a large number of the changes they had made, and he got rid of some of the other ones. So there's a creative process that was going on there. I think that you have to be aware of your audience and what it is that they would have to know. Maybe they don't have to know anything, but if you want them to learn to engage with what you're doing, you've got to make it short enough for them to be able to go back and do it again, and read it again, or experience it again, or watch it again, or listen to it again. When I come across something that is culturally very different to my own background, I have to do it again and again and again and again to let the text mimetically soak into my structure, so that I figure out where are the resonances, where are the reverberations, where is it that this is nurturing me. I think it would be great if this program, the performance-based program, could either in small ways or really big ways explore performative writing as something that it is doing, because you are in an academic situation and the academy requires that you write. And yet, if you are going to be true to what it is that you believe the communication process is in terms of performance and performativity, you're going to experiment with the writing. And of course, performative writing doesn't have to be physical writing. It can be movement. There's a wonderful Canadian poet called B.P. Nichol who blames all of his writing on his fingertips. And he has one poem about his fingers taking off and doing all this stuff, and he's not responsible for it. It's just his fingertips.